I work at Starbucks, and something happened a few weeks ago that really freaked me out. For a little background, I'm an 18-year-old female and have worked at Starbucks for about 6 months. So I was working until close one day, and I was behind the counter making drinks for most of the time for much of the shift. I was kept pretty busy. I didn't really notice many of the people that would be sitting around inside our location is large enough that there's a good amount of tables and seats. So it's fairly popular for people to bring their laptops and work and things like that. A tone point, and noticed a few of the people sitting around. One of them was this guy's eating alone at a table on his laptop. He was probably about middle-aged, had dark hair, and was wearing a blue jacket. When I noticed him, he was staring at me. Hadn't look away though. When I saw him, I had to look away because it was weird. But then I just kept working, and I didn't think about the guy or look over in his direction. Any more hours later, though, when things quieted down significantly, I was not quite as busy at that point and noticed the very few people that were still inside. I think there were just 2 or 3 people sitting around. One of them was the same guy from earlier. And when I noticed him, he was staring at me again, and once more did not look away. It was almost unsettling how weird it seemed to me. I also thought that it was weird at first how I had been there for so long. But I guessed it wasn't that strange for people to work all day in the coffee shop after all. As we approached closing time, it was now just me and another coworker. The other customer soon left, but the man remained. The closer it got to closing time, the more nervous I was just going to keep sitting here past close. Thankfully, with about 5 minutes left before we closed for the night, as a whim getting up to leave. Then he walked out the door, and I felt better. I stayed for a while longer until I was good to go. After I left work, I just drove straight home that night. The Starbucks is in an area with lots of other stores and restaurants right nearby, and it's always kind of busy over it. Here I live with my parents at their house, which is about a 10-minute ride from the Starbucks. So I drove home and then went inside. It was probably like 9 p.m. By that point, I just remembered that maybe about 10 minutes or so after getting back, I noticed this car parked on the side of the street outside. It was pretty much across from our house, and the engine of the car was running. What was strange is that it's pretty unusual for cars to be parked on the side of our street. It's not really in the city, and everybody has large driveways. Is all the lights to the car turn off, and I just decided to go over to the window and look at it. When I got closer, I noticed that there was somebody inside the driver's seat. It looked just like the same guy who had been at the Starbucks staring at me. At first, I thought that I was paranoid thinking about the guy, and there was no way that it was really him, but then he looked over at the house as a whim for like Ace Con. And then I quickly ducked down so that he wouldn't see me. I realized in that moment that it was for sure the same guy. This kind of freaked me out because, of course, I wondered if he had somehow followed me home or something away from the window, and I didn't want them to see me or anything. But a short time later, my curiosity got the better of me, and I went back. Not only was the car still there, but the man was still in the driver's seat and appeared to be looking at me. He moved away from the window again and found my dad, who was thankfully still up. He decided to go outside and confront the man. However, as soon as my dad left the house and began to walk towards the car, it quickly drove away. I figured that was pretty incriminating, and that the probably wasn't just there because he was lost or something. Since then, I have not seen the man out in my neighborhood and not at Starbucks, and I'm really happy about that. I'm hoping that I never see him again. This is the story of something crazy that happened one time when I went to Starbucks. So it was a day where I was with my husband, and the two of us had been out for a long time. We were driving back to the city that we live in. And on the way back, it was getting to be night time. Now we were tired. We stopped off the highway in some random city and went to a Starbucks. It was in the corner of this shopping center parking lot that looked mostly empty by now, except neither my husband or I realized that the Starbucks was now closed. We drove to the parking lot, and for some reason my husband parked kind of far away. He always does that, probably because his truck is usually too big to park in the middle of all the other cars anyways. After parking, Wes started walking past the strip mall where all the stores were now closed. Then the Starbucks was just beyond that. There were like 2 or 3 vehicles in the Starbucks parking lot who were parked on the other end sort of far away. And then the other was this older looking 4 doors Dan parked out front pretty close. When we walked on the sidewalk, it appeared that there were several people inside of the car. I remember for whatever reason looking over at the short time later, what I saw was about 4 men inside, and they were all wearing these black ski masks over their faces. They also appeared to be looking at. It was sort of strange, and honestly it looked very suspicious as well. So we kept walking down the sidewalk until we got to the Starbucks doors. Then we tried opening them. However, they were locked around this same moment. I heard the car behind us start to move. We looked back and saw the car making a U-turn. and then it started driving away through the parking lot pretty quickly. When the car was gone, we realized that Starbucks had closed about 10 minutes earlier. After reading their hours on the door, my husband kept looking in the window. Thought then and noticed him waving over an employee. Had told me that he was going to alert them about the men in masks. The employee came to the door and thankfully opened it. He said they were closed, but we told her about the car with the masked men. Then we left. We went to another place to get coffee before heading back on the road. Looking back, I'm not sure if those men were planning to rob the Starbucks or rob the employees or what may be. They were waiting for one of the employees to head out for the night, or maybe they were about to make their move and got at the door. So possibly we foiled their plans by cluelessly trying to get coffee after close. Or maybe it was just four friends who like to drive around wearing ski masks innocently. I really don't know for sure, but I'm glad that we stopped there that night. I used to work at Starbucks years back. It was an okay job. I was like 19 or 20, and this was a long time ago now, so I don't remember a whole lot, to be honest, but one thing that I do remember for sure was an event that took place one quiet night. The Starbucks I worked at was connected to a strip mall. We were on the fair end though, and most of the other businesses were never that busy. We would get a decent amount of customers most of the time Zoom day. I worked a pretty normal shift. I don't really remember a whole lot from during the shift, but I was closing, and I know that after we closed at 8:30, another coworker, Jessica, and I were the only ones there. We were cleaning up and preparing to one thing that we had to do. I'll stake out the trash. I decided to do it, and I remember that the trash cans used to always get filled up really fast. They would also be very heavy. It took some trash bags, and I put one of them in a large trash bin out back behind the building, behind the Starbucks. Is where it was, and other that there was a small access road between a fence and some trees. It was normally very quiet back thereafter. It took out the first bag of trash. I went back inside for the other one, going just behind the counter. Then I made my way through the back room and outside again, and tossed the second trash bag, and then went back in Jessica, and I finished up with what we had to do for the next few minutes. But during this time, I remembered that we both heard a noise coming from the back room area. We both stopped what we were doing and looked at each other. At first, I was afraid that it was something like a mouse or a squirrel, because when I was taking out the trash, I had left the back door propped open between trips. The reason was because I had my hands full and I was only gone for like 30 seconds or so. The sound was not really that loud that we heard, but it was obvious. None of us knew exactly what it was, but I was very nervous about it after. It was quiet for like a minute. We decided to go look, so the two of us walked towards the back room and then entered it. We had a decent amount of storage space back there at our location. I remember looking around and at first seeing nothing, but when we started to walk around back, there suddenly is a something. There were a few boxes sort of stacked in the corner. This man stood up from behind. Man face, that she had a bird and kind of looked homeless. Seeing him was really the last thing that I was expecting to see. I thought that maybe I had the critter into the building, but another was a man here. He was holding a bottle of syrup in his hands. It finally spoke and said, "Who are you?" The man moved away, and he was basically cornered. There was a shelf on wheels between him, Jessica, and I. The guy pushed the shelf over, nearly hitting Jessica and causing it fall, and everything fell off of it, making a huge mess. Then the man jumped over the shelf and Weboth took a step back. After that, though, he turned to the left and ran for the back door. Thankfully, he left the building. After that, we were just glad he was gone, and Jessica and I went over, and of course made sure the door was locked. Then we spent the next 20 minutes or so cleaning up the mess. After we were finally done and I was leaving, I saw the homeless guy walking through the parking lot that was still holding the syrup bottle in his hands. I worked there at that Starbucks for a while longer, and I never made the mistake of leaving the back door open again. However, I did hear that the guy used to hang out behind our Starbucks in the bushes. Quite often I had an encounter with someone at Starbucks that I would really like to forget. It was about 5 years ago now, and I was in college during this time. I would always have a lot of homework and studying to do. I lived off campus, and I would go to the Starbucks to study. Sometimes it was every short drive from my places. So I was there one day, and I sat in this spot that was sort of out of the way. I was at a table by myself and had my laptop and started studying. I also had headphones in, and that focus, however, about an hour, and then randomly some guy came up and closed my laptop screen. I just saw it closing and then saw this guy quickly walking away. It made me angry, and I watched him walk very fast away from me to the other side of the coffee shop. He was sort of tall, thin, had glasses and dark hair, and appeared to be fairly young. I decided not to walk over to him or anything. I didn't know why he randomly closed my laptop, and it certainly wasn't an accident. I was sitting way out of the way. After a few moments, though, I just decided to forget about it and continue with my work. So I opened my laptop and then went back to work. Now, I was working for about another hour before it happened again. Randomly, I just saw someone getting close and then close my screen again. It took out my headphones and looked up. The same guy was there, and he was. Now quickly walking away again. This time is stood up and was going to say something to him, but he was walking away so fast that by the time I did, he was already far away. He wasn't laughing or anything. So I didn't know if this was a joke to him or what. I kept watching him, but soon went out of my sight to another area in the coffee shop. So I sat back down again, opened my laptop up, and continued for the second time. If he did it again, there was going to be a major problem after studying for at least another hour. I had mostly forgotten about the rude guy. I was almost done, and then out of nowhere it happened again. He went up and closed my laptop and then started walking away really fast. I got up faster this time and started to follow him, except instead of going to the other end of the coffee shop again, he walked out the doors and left my laptop and stuff were still at the tables. I did not leave. So angry, however, at least the man was now gone. I went back over to my seat and looked out of the window. The man had gone around the corner of the building to another area of the parking lot, it seemed, and was out of my sight. I finished up with my work, 10 more minutes, then I packed up my stuff and left. I went out my car and got inside her after I got though before I could drive away. Is all this car drive in front of me. Then it drove into the space next to me in a way where their driver's window was lined up with my driver's window. It trolled down. And I looked over and saw the same man who kept closing my laptop was driving. I was so mad and I rolled down my window because I wanted to give him a piece of my mind, but I was also curious to see what he had to say. The first thing he said was, "Where are you going?" in a really creepy way. "Is Ed, what's wrong with you? Why did you keep closing my laptop?" The guy didn't answer, instead he denied it, claiming he didn't do it. I was fed up with him, and it told him to leave me alone. Then it started to drive away. However, before I got out of the parking lot, the man backed up, turned his car and started to drive after me. I was afraid that I was going to get followed. I slammed on my brakes and stopped before I drove out onto the busy roads and went home. I decided to confront the man in the parking lot. This probably was not a very good idea, but at least there were other people around. So I left my car and started to walk over to him. In this moment, though, he hit the gas and veered around me. Well, as my car, he nearly hit my car, but quickly peeled away and left to Starbucks. It didn't really surprise me. I was glad that he was gone again, though at that point I drove back home and thankfully never saw the man again. I didn't go back to that Starbucks either. For a while, I had this weird experience a couple of years ago. I was living by myself in an apartment and working in an office on the other end of the city. Most days, I make coffee, but occasionally I get it from places. One day, I stopped at the local Starbucks on my way to work. It was a nice morning and surprisingly quiet. Inside of Starbucks, there were just a couple of other people inside, and nobody was in line to order, just one other person. Got there after me and went in line behind. Mezzo, I ordered the drink that I usually get, then it took and left and went to work. No fast forward the rest of the day to the evening. It was like 8 p.m. or so, and I was at home in my apartment. Then out of nowhere, there was a knock on my door. I had no clue who it would be, so I walked over and went to look out. The people, nobody was there. It was really strange. I opened up my door, and I looked outside in the hallway to see. I didn't see anybody. However, I did notice that there was a Starbucks drink on the ground right next to the door. I was very confused, but picked it up. At first, I thought that maybe somebody had ordered Starbucks and it was delivered to the wrong apartment by mistake. But then I realized that was impossible, because the Starbucks drink would not just be delivered alone and set on the ground, and there was no receipt or anything. When I looked at the cup, I saw that my first name was on it, and it was the exact same drink that I had ordered earlier that day. I was very confused. Now, I didn't drink it though, because I had no clue who had delivered it to me. Something else strange happened the next day when I was leaving for work. I noticed this guy, kind of standing around outside the building. I didn't recognize him at the time though, and had never seen him around the building before. I was in the mood to get Starbucks again, and also confused about everything, so I went there this time. It was much like the previous day. I guess that Starbucks location just usually isn't that busy, because it was quiet inside and there was no line. I ordered the same drink, and I noticed that as I was doing so, a guy walked in and got in line behind me after I ordered. I got a better look at him, and that's when I put everything together. I realized that same man was the guy who was standing outside of my apartment. He was also the same guy who was in line behind me in Starbucks the previous day, and I realized that he must have been the person who delivered the drink to my apartment. Still, it all seemed to make sense in my head, but saying it out loud seemed crazy. I didn't say anything to the man. I just tried to keep better tabs on what he was doing. After I left, it didn't follow me or anything. I was at work and then went back home that night. I did not receive another Starbucks drink at my door or anything. However, 2 nights later, I remember that I noticed out my window seeing some lights. I can see part of the parking lot from my apartment windows, and when I looked out, I could see that the police were there. They're based on the blue and red flashing lights. However, I did not see exactly where they were. I was curious, so I walked out into the hallway and to the stairwell, which had a clear view. When I looked, I saw the police. Alking To guy was the same man who I kept seeing. Why, I didn't know. I went back to my apartment, wondering what the deal was with that guy. I found out from a neighbor the next day that he had been stalking a woman who lived in the building, and the man didn't even live in the apartment complex. The woman he had been stalking had found out and reported him, and thankfully he was caught. However, I realized that it possibly could have also been meth that he was stalking, and he seemed to know where I lived. Maybe things could have got worse if he wasn't caught.